Welcome to the 75 podcast. This is where we talk with leaders, organizers, and everyday people shaping the future of our democracy, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Michael Hahn, and today we're heading to California's 47th Congressional District to meet someone running a different kind of campaign. Hunter Garcia Miranda is stepping up to represent a district that stretches from Orange County's coastal neighborhoods to its growing communities inland. And he's running with a mission: putting people before money and community before corporate influence. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Have you ever wondered how our political system became so intertwined with big money? Well, it wasn't always like this. Decades ago, there were limits and regulations in place to prevent corruption and ensure fair elections. But then came a series of pivotal court decisions that established that money equals speech, setting the stage for the wealthy to have an outsized influence on politics. It's no wonder that over 75% of Americans believe it's time to take big money out of politics. Join us as we explore how money influences U.S. politics in profound and sometimes unsettling ways. The 75 podcast starts now.
Welcome to the 75 podcast. I'm your host, Michael Hahn, and today I'm going to be joined in a conversation with Hunter Garcia Miranda. Hunter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, I really appreciate being on and the opportunity to talk. And the work that your organization does is so important. Calling out this such vital concept in our democracy and ensuring that we can work towards getting the money, the drastic influence that money's had in our politics out of the system and really return power to the people. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for agreeing to come on. I think it's so important to have leaders that are standing up and recognizing this issue. So, I want to thank you as well. The feeling's kind of mutual for sure. And what we're doing is growing. So hopefully, these conversations have an impact and we get more people engaged and empowered by it and inspired to run in races that currently don't have any candidates that are speaking up against the money and politics problem. So
Exactly.
I thank you for joining. Yeah. So let's get at the heart of it. I mentioned in the intro, I think I did at least. You're a lawyer. You're a lawyer by trade, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of good stories and experience in the legal fields that you could probably share with us. But why don't you tell us this kind of high level, your background?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I'm an attorney in California. I had the opportunity to start my career working in state and municipal law. So kind of got exposed to the more local side of things and seeing how that plays out on a day-to-day basis. I was fortunate enough to do kind of a wide variety of things within that. So ranging from things like nuisance abatement to, criminal prosecutions and kind of the wide breadth of things in between that. I've recently switched gears towards immigration law. I'm sure people are well aware of the situation that's happening with immigrant communities, specifically with access to due process protections. So as an attorney, that's one thing, specifically coming from Southern California and in Orange County. In my district, we have big immigrant communities and they're vital parts of our economy and our culture and our communities that are here. So we wanted to make sure that they have the correct protections and things that I'm sure you're well aware of the Trump's administration's, crackdown on immigration, and particularly with deportations, where you have them rounding up people that have been here for decades, no criminal records, no criminal history, and separating them from their families without any sort of due process. So that was one of the major things that we wanted to try and tackle. And that's what I've been, switching gears towards, making sure that I can focus on trying to help address that issue. So yeah, I have a variety of relatively shorter experience in the legal field, but that's kind of where my current focus is in the immigration realm. And
That's
trying
really
to ensure.
interesting. It sounds really helpful too to a lot of people that probably, need some assistance to get their voice heard. If they're here for the right reason, and if they're here legally and abiding by the rules, they've been here for a long time, and let their case be heard. And it's good that you're doing that to help them
Right.
with that. I think immigration reform, I know it's a hot topic right now, and rightfully so, because we have had a lot of people, coming to the country illegally or in search for some escape from the poverty in their home countries, right? But we don't have the system to accommodate it currently.
Exactly. And like you
It seems
mentioned,
like.
one thing, like the importance of actually addressing the root causes of those issues and looking back at, okay, how do we work with those countries diplomatically to ensure that we can address the root causes of those issues, or why people are fleeing or why people are coming here in the first place. And really, that's a very long-term strategy that has to be addressed. But I totally agree that has to be the focus of ensuring, okay, how do we make sure to prevent these? And then simultaneously, the people that are here, making sure that we have a fair, equitable system, but then also a safe system, right? We have to have a system where people can't be coming into the country illegally, and criminal offenders that are coming here illegally and then committing crimes, they have to be deported. You can't have both, where you have people coming here illegally and then harming or committing crimes in this country. That can't be the case. But there's a huge distinction between that, which should be happening, and what's currently happening, where you have the administration rounding up people that are dropping their children off at school, or even there's been cases where ICE has been showing up to schools to round up children that have, in the system. And so there's these clear distinction where that is, in my opinion, has been taking it too far and drastically impacting immigrant communities here unfairly, as opposed to, the necessity to secure our borders and deport criminal offenders. There has to be that clear distinction made. And the current administration has gone way too far in doing that. So
that fair to assume that's one of the main reasons why you were stepping up to get into the political field and represent the district. Is that one of the main areas for you?
yeah, definitely one of the main. I mean, there's a plethora of issues, ranging from mainly, like we talked about, the drastic influence that big money has in politics, as well as the fact that our entire economic and political system has been rigged, right? So we have a system that over the last 50, 60 years has intentionally and very meticulously been geared towards a system that was supposed to be by the people for the people, but has instead been morphed into a system rigged to extract wealth and power from the working class and concentrate it in the hands of a very select few. And we have to realize too that unfortunately hasn't been a reality that has occurred under both Democratic and Republican leadership. So as a Democrat running, I want to be a voice in the party that will actually call that out and say, hey, we as a party have to do things drastically differently to, one, actually call out what's currently happening in the current system we have, where you have such a rigged system that is so deferential towards big money and big money interests and screws over the little guy. And push us to policies that will actually address those root causes and say, hey, we can have a system where people can have a voice and one single vote can matter, rather than being so drowned out by all the big money interests that we currently have. And unfortunately, if we don't have voices in the party that are willing to actually call that out and wanting to make those changes, then we're just going to be playing the same political games and doing the same things over and over again. Which is why we were so excited to get in this primary and actually wanting to challenge Democrats and say, hey, we need to have different opinions, different voices in the party to actually call that out. So
That's amazing, because it really is so desperately needed right now. It's almost just not even mentioned on the campaign trail. It's not mentioned in the flyers that go out that everybody gets, just such an abundance of. And I know probably we're a ways away from the primary. So right now in your district, I imagine the political advertising is minimal probably currently, but it's going to be coming next year for sure, where it's going to be immigration issue or probably Second Amendment rights, make America great again, type things, America first. But all those things are right and true. But what's not discussed is money in politics. So credit to you. I like to say always respect and credit to the people that recognize it and want to step up and do something. So, the fact that it's like one of your number ones, that's
Mm-hmm.
huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge for
Yeah,
what we need as
definitely.
a people. So,
Yeah,
um,
exactly. And one thing we've been really fortunate to see in our campaign is not just in our district and in California, but across the country. There's so many people that are actually wanting to call that out and wanting to say those things. So I think we definitely have the momentum and movement and people there. It's just a matter of actually carrying that through, making sure that we're paying attention in the primaries, because a lot of people unfortunately tend to just wait till the general elections and not actually deal it with the primaries, because that's really where the real important work is done. Because
sure.
essentially the current system you have oftentimes is where the party will, have their person that they support in the prime, or, depending on how the primaries operate. For example, in our district, you have an incumbent Democrat, which will have this inherent support of the party and the party backing. And with that comes all the money that the party has, right? So inherently it creates a system where you are inherently beholden to those big money interests. And then when you actually get to office to actually implement the policies and things that you were running on, you then have to default to where those big money and those big money interests are coming from, as opposed to grassroots campaigns, which you see popping up across the country. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with hearing about and working with a lot of different campaigns across the country this election cycle. We have so many people wanting to step up and actually run for office themselves, which has been so encouraging to see, because, like I said earlier, you have so many people that are so discontent with the current system and wanting to actually be a voice in the party to call those things out and make those drastic changes. Because, like I said earlier, unfortunately, if we as a party aren't willing to actually hold a mirror up to ourselves and realize the things that we have to be doing drastically differently, then nothing's going to change. We'll just be stuck in these same exact cycles. So I've definitely seen it, not just in our district, but across the country, of the people wanting to step up and actually push for these changes and call these things out. So it's definitely an exciting time. There's obviously, a lot of scary things going on, but I do definitely see that momentum and see people wanting to make that change. So I'm very hopeful and excited for that.
Yeah, it kind of like leads me into my next question, which is, we just recently had the second No Kings protest. And, that show of I would say force is not necessarily the right word, but the numbers of people that turned out to say that they were frustrated with the government, right? It was significant. It was a significant number of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I applaud everybody for coming out, and I get that there's certain things that are seemingly like authoritarian in rule, and the executive branch is exercising powers that probably should be residing with Congress in certain things. But we did vote. We as a country voted Donald Trump as president, so he's not technically a king. And part of it, I'm going to lead to a question, but part of it seems like it's energy that might be, I don't know if it's set towards the right objective, just in general, if it has that. What's your take on the No Kings movement, and the protest that we just recently had?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, it's a perfect encapsulation of people's frustration with not just, I mean, obviously specifically with the Trump administration, the things that have been occurring, like what we talked about with immigration, or, we can go down the list of things where, a lot of people fundamentally disagree with, and I agree with them in that regard, that there's a lot of things that the Trump administration have done that have drastically pushed the bounds of what our democratic systems are supposed to be. And like you mentioned, the certain powers that should be instilled in Congress that has to be addressed and talked about. But like you mentioned too, I think it's an encapsulation of kind of people's overarching frustration with the entire system. And in that same vein, that was essentially kind of the point of why Trump was elected in the first place, is that he was seen as an outsider to this system and something different and alternative. And which is why he had, garnered so much support in both elections, is because that he was seen as someone different and an alternative to the structures that we have. Unfortunately, he is a billionaire that has been ultimately beholden to billionaire interests, and has, for example, with the big beautiful bill, was one of the most massive wealth transfers in the history of our nation, where you have systems put in place that will just further exacerbate the concentration of wealth in the upper 1% specifically. With that being said, it was a representation of something different, right? And something that people could actually say, hey, okay, we can the current system has been screwing us over for the last 50 years. Let's try something different. Unfortunately, that alternative was a crazy alternative that hasn't worked out. But with that being said, there is that frustration in people wanting to see that change. So what I think the key is that we make sure we translate that energy and that momentum into actual change in the midterms, for example. And with that being said, making sure that whether it be a Democrat or a Republican, we're actually paying attention to the primaries and who we're actually voting for in those primaries, rather than just taking what the party gives us and hoping for the best, right? Because unfortunately, if we stick with the party and stick with the party systems that are in place, nothing's going to change, right? We have to be calling things out and doing things drastically differently. And we have to have voices in the party that will actually call that out. So what that actually means is to actually vote for people in the primaries that will make those changes. And hopefully we can see that energy that we saw in the No Kings protests translate into actual policy changes. So that would be the end goal. The key is just making sure that momentum carries over to the primaries and then to the midterms as well.
Do you view yourself as an outsider as well, given that you're talking about money in politics, where most establishment politicians and incumbents just rarely discuss that?
Yeah, I think so. I have been working in Democratic politics for the last 10 years, working on different campaigns and different levels across the spectrum. And one thing, the biggest realizations I had is that internal change, in the sense of, specifically policy discussions and, nuanced policy discussions, it's very hard within the system to create those changes, because it's essentially a top-down approach where the party kind of dictates policy that then the elected officials, for the most part, will align themselves with. As opposed to, the alternative where you have individual politicians that are pushing for policies that they think are best for the people, which aren't necessarily beholden to the main overarching party itself. So, for example, things like we're talking about now, where you have, drastic campaign finance reform, you won't necessarily see the typical people in the party calling for those changes, because they're the beneficiaries of the current system, right? So actually having voices from the outside, unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where that's needed. And one of the main reasons why our campaign was started in the first place was to actually be a voice in the party to call that out from the inside, rather than just trying to play the normal systems that have been working in the past.
Yeah. I would think that the establishment views you as an outsider. The piece of it that I don't think you're an outsider is that you're representing the voices of the majority of Americans that identify this as a problem. So
Exactly.
In that instance, yeah, it's strange, but you're an outside to the body of politics that we have right now, but you're an insider to representing the vast majority of Americans that feel we have a problem on our hands with the amount of money that's influencing politicians.
Yeah.
And willing to call it out.
Yeah, that's such I think a perfect representation of the system as a whole, is that you have the political system that is, exists in its own little bubble. And, there's certain perspectives and takes that people have based off of that bubble. And then you compare that to what the actual American people are talking about and dealing with. And it seems oftentimes that those are two different realities, that politicians will live in this bubble and not actually realize what people are struggling with and actually want to be addressed and talked about. But our politicians are so stuck in this political world where they have to be, for example, as a Democrat, everything you say has to be anti-MAGA, anti-Trump, this idea of everything is political and partisan, rather than coming up with solutions that people actually want to talk about and people want actual solutions for, right? Has been one of the most frustrating things, is seeing like that level of disconnect that there is between what people actually are talking about and want to see passed, and the common sense things that Americans are struggling and dealing with. And then you have the political world, which is so disconnected from reality and stuck in its political games because they're so beholden on money. So, for example, in my district, you have and across the country, essentially, the main play with for Democrats is to be anti-Trump and anti-MAGA, and that's their whole lane, is because they know that they can get donations that way because it riles people up so much, rather than actually focusing on specific policies that'll create real tangible change in people's lives and try and unrig our system. They're focused on these political games for political purposes rather than actual policy. And I think if we as a party can gear ourselves back towards being a party of the working class and pushing for policies that'll benefit the working class and everyday working class Americans, then that's how we will win elections. We won't win elections just being the anti-party, right? We have to have an alternative and a solution that'll actually unrig our system and call out the political corruption that we have. And then in order to do that, we have to have challengers in the party to make that a reality. So
yeah. And that's the hypothesis. This is where the change is possible, and that hope that the system can be changed is possible, because
exactly,
there are a lot of people running that support this, that support, and I say this meaning like a constitutional amendment to allow for campaign finance reform. Because right now, states can pass finance reform bills, but more likely than not, they're going to be deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court.
Right.
Because a precedent that was set in the 70s that, to me, and probably most of Americans, is just ludicrous. It's a ludicrous concept, and it's completely opinion-based. And that opinion is money equals speech. I don't think that money equals speech. I know the Supreme Court said that money enables speech, and money can buy, for me, I'll let you say, money can buy advertising, and money can buy a lot of things, but there's a difference between money and speech to me. And unfortunately, it seems like we need to have that in our Constitution, because the Supreme Court doesn't get that concept. What do you think about that, Supreme Court opinion from the mid 70s that says, money equals speech, essentially?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with your assessment. Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, the concept that money is speech in and of itself does make sense to an extent. So the idea, and this was the Supreme Court's logic, was that, an individual or a corporation, even, the government shouldn't be the one to say, hey, you can't spend X amount of money to get someone that you like elected, right? So that concept does kind of inherently somewhat make sense. Me as a private citizen, if I want to go spend as much money as I want to get, whoever elected, that concept does make sense. But then you factor in the current actual reality that we live in, where you have such disproportionate amounts of wealth, and the idea that one individual or one company can then go into the political system, spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in a lot of cases, to drastically influence that political system, then that just becomes, an untenable situation. And that's, the current reality that we're living in, where you have massive billionaires, multinational corporations drastically influencing our politics by using money and funneling millions and millions of dollars into these campaigns that then ultimately win the elections and then get them favorable policy. So it's a direct trade-off. And to your point, we have to have real tangible solutions, one of the most important being an actual amendment to the Constitution to address that and say, hey, you cannot have these disproportionate amounts of wealth drastically influencing our politics, right? And your intro video did such an amazing job of encapsulating the idea that it doesn't have to be like that, right? We've had systems in the past, and we had, structures in the past that prevented that and prevented corruption and prevented the level of influence that we're currently seeing. And we can easily go back to those. It's just if we have politicians that are actually brave enough and willing to do that. So I think that's something super important for people to realize, is that we've done this in the past and we can do it again. It's not an insurmountable, feat to do. We can do it. It's just the matter of actually having politicians in office that are willing to push for those big changes, which unfortunately, you have a lot of Democrats specifically not willing to make that jump. But then on the flip side too, and I'll give them their props, you do have a good chunk of Democrats that are pushing for that as well. So that's something that, needs to be, called out and appreciated. But in the same vein, that has to be spread across the board. It can't just be when it comes to this one specific issue. The idea of getting money out of politics politics has to range in every single issue that our politicians are voting on, whether that be, agricultural reform, where you have these massive agricultural companies dominating the system and creating foods that are, unhealthy for us and all these different things, or whether it be, immigration, like we talked about, or criminal justice reform, like we talked about, where you have big money influence on all of these aspects of politics, making sure that they're actually calling each of those out rather than just when it comes to campaign finance reform. But with that being said, that is the most important starting point because it affects everything else down the line. So,
Yeah. And, also just our whole, capitalist economy setup where capitalism depends on the guardrails around the regulation around the system, so that there's free, what's the right word to use? There's like a balanced approach and fair capitalist approach with, the smaller guys, the smaller companies being able to compete against the larger companies, and, having the larger companies be able to buy the government, it eliminates the competition. And when you eliminate the competition, the consumers suffer. And capitalism was designed to be a concept that was balanced across, and lower prices what was going to result for the consumers based on the competition.
Right.
But now you have, John Thorpe from Tennessee, our interview last week, said it's crony capitalism, where it's been purchased. So all these issues with at the center, money and politics. So, I commend you you talked about courage for standing up. And I think it takes a little courage, but the rewards are immense because you're supporting hundreds of millions of people, not just in America, but around the world, that are so desperate for this right now. And you're not alone. That's the good news. So,
yeah. And one thing, a really good point you made is the system that we're currently in is we have such a monopolization problem. For example, you have, like you mentioned, the concept of capitalism is you have these individual companies vying to be the best, right? So competition ensures lower prices, ensures higher quality, and all these things. But with the way capitalism functions, right, is that as these different companies are competing against each other, they'll inherently knock each other off, right? And then it will naturally lead to a monopoly issue. So in order to combat that inherent problem that will eventually come up, that's when government has to step in and play a factor, like you mentioned, provide those guardrails to keep it safe and fair and protect consumers and prevent the companies from going too far, right? And preventing those monopolization problems. But the issue that you have is if that regulation and those guardrails aren't done in the proper nuanced way to actually address, allow the companies to do very well, but then also protect consumers and prevent against monopolizations. If that's not done properly, then you end up in the current system where we have now, where you have massive multinational corporations dominating our industries and essentially monopolizing them, where you have 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 major companies in each industry that own 80-90% of those markets, and then essentially have formed their own monopolies. And then when you actually look at the funders of those companies, it's essentially a lot of the same actors. So you have these giant webs of monopolies that are built out, which end up screwing over the average working person. And, all the issues that we as Americans are dealing with unlivable wages, people not able to afford to pay rent, food, child education. For example, 50% of inflation that has occurred since 2020 is directly linked to just corporate profiteering. So it's more than half of the increases in prices that we've seen since, they like to blame it on the pandemic and all these different factors, but it ultimately literally 50% comes down to the fact that they as companies can just increase the prices because they have such a domination on those industries. Is a crazy reality, and something that has to be addressed and called out from a governmental standpoint, where we're actually, whether it be breaking up some companies that are too big or addressing, allowing for further competition, allowing small businesses to actually compete with these massive corporations, where in reality, today it's very, very hard for small shops to even survive. So that's, like you mentioned, something that has to be addressed and called out from a top-down approach. and won't be changed, like we keep saying, is if we keep electing these same exact people to Washington, then that aren't willing to actually address those root causes of those issues, then nothing will change.
So do you think it's fair to say then if you believe in capitalism and you believe in that free, market capitalism, that you actually need campaign finance reform today? Like those two really kind of
Yeah,
go hand in hand and they're central. Yeah.
I would agree with that very much so.
I thought you would. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so many issues that derive from this problem. Okay. Where to go to next? Hunter, what is kind of the pulse on the street in the district in California's 47th today? What are the people suffering with, or what are the things that need to be addressed in the Orange County and extended areas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like we said, there's always a huge list of issues that are people dealing with. The top of which has consistently been affordability and the cost of living. Especially in Southern California, we live in a very expensive area. Specifically with housing prices, it's pricing people out. People in my generation, it's a distant hope to try and own a house, specifically in Orange County. I know so many people.
I'm sorry for that. Yeah,
right, have been
it's
born
so
and
terrible.
raised here. We've grown up here, and then even someone like me, for example, who's an attorney, who is making more money than, say, someone working a 9 to 5, and even in that case, it's incredibly difficult for the basic necessities to afford, whether it be specifically buying a house, renting, even food, education, childcare, all of these necessities that people need. They aren't able to make ends meet when it comes to actually delivering on those things. And with, like we talked about earlier, it goes directly back to this notion that our entire economic system and political system has been morphed to extract wealth and power from the working class and concentrated in the hands of a select few. So the idea that one person can work a 9 to 5, work minimum wage, and not be able to afford rent, afford food, is crazy, right? And it's supposedly the richest country in the history of the planet. And people aren't asking for much, right? They aren't asking for handouts or all, free, all of these things that people like to sometimes make the argument about.
They don't want to have to ask for them, I think.
Exactly. People just want the basic necessities. They want to be able to work. Some people are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week even, and not being able to make ends meet. Is an insane reality and something that has to be called out. But that has been consistently one of the issues that people have been struggling with, rightfully so.
I think, when you're talking about affordability, a good benchmark to me is like, say, okay, so many, and it's great, so many young people want to become teachers, right? And it's a great profession. It's so needed. We need teachers. We need good teachers in our public schools, because that's how we grow as a country and we develop. Yeah. It's challenging for teachers to afford houses and living in a lot of the cities and suburbs around the cities.
Yep.
That profession is like a benchmark to me. Like, if you can't afford to live or struggle to live as a teacher, there's a problem. And I think that we've heard that now for a number of years, that teachers aren't paid enough. And it's twofold. One, teachers aren't paid enough. Twofold, the cost of living is so darn high that it makes it, that way.
Exactly. No, literally, my sister, she's a teacher. My brother's a teacher. We have a lot of teachers in our families. And she, for example, was literally priced out of California, where she couldn't afford to live here because of the pay that they were making, which is a crazy concept, right? Like you mentioned, education is literally one of the most important things for any civilization, and to ensure that we have a proper, well-funded, well-structured education system for our children is quintessential to any, specifically a democracy, but any civilization. And the current situation that we're living in with, like you mentioned, where teachers literally can't afford to live in the cities that they're teaching in, right? They have to spend their own money for supplies and all of the situations that we've been hearing about for years. And the fact that teachers have been calling this out for years, and to see that nothing has really changed is insane. And I think that goes back to kind of what, as a society, we are prioritizing, where our funding is going. So, for example, in the current system, you have a domination of the military industrial complex and military contractors, where you have so much of our resources and funding going to those priorities that the government has chosen as priorities, when it's done in such an inefficient and ineffective way, and essentially a waste of a lot of money, when you could be doing things a lot more streamlined and efficient and effective, and reprioritizing where we're actually putting our money and putting our funding behind. We can have a safe, country where we're spending, lots of money on defense and doing the things that a lot of people like to say we need to do, but doing that efficiently and effectively, so that we can actually spend our resources on bettering our people, rather than just perpetuating global conflict and things that the current system has been doing for so long. And that's just one example of things that we as a government can be doing differently and more efficiently and effectively. But actually reprioritizing things and restructuring them, one of them making sure that we're reprioritizing education, specifically with teacher pay, and making sure that they're getting the resources and access to the pay that they need to actually live in those areas and teach properly. And that goes back to the whole concept of ensuring that everyone across the board should be making more money, having more money in their pockets to choose what they want to do with. And this kind of goes back to the Band-Aid programs that we were talking about a little bit earlier, where you have the government step in and try and, for example, solve some of the symptoms of poverty, rather than actually addressing the root causes of those problems, which then just results in increased taxes, and then, just a vicious cycle of not being able to get people out of those systems of poverty, where what people really want is more money in their pockets, so that they have the agency to actually do things, whether that be investing, or paying for their child's school, simple things like that people need to have money in their own pockets, rather than the government being the one to provide those programs, is kind of a mindset that we as a Democratic Party have to really adjust and shift towards, is ensuring that our focus should be empowering the working class and getting money in the pockets of the working class, and unrigging our system so that someone working a 9 to 5, whether it be 40, 50, 60 hours a week, isn't just getting by, but actually getting ahead and thriving and being able to build a better future for their children and then their own family. So that has to be the refocus of where we as a party, that should be, in my opinion, our single focus, is ensuring that is a reality for every single American. And if we can make that case to voters, then I think, the Democrats would do a lot better.
Democrats, anybody that can make that case, that says that we have a problem with the system, I think you're going to start to connect with the voters, because trust, that's, I think, one of the main problems that voters have, and why we have such low voter turnout overall, is we just don't trust it. We just don't trust it. So it comes down to, how do we trust you? How do we trust whomever is running, that what they're saying isn't just BS? And, for starters, I think that coming out and calling out the system is one way. Obviously, you have to separate between somebody that's not being honest about calling out the system and somebody that is, and you have to also have some faith in it, but how do we rebuild trust in our politicians, in our media? I feel like it might come down to leadership a little bit, like we've been led by leadership that has now created a lack of trust. And if we get the right leadership in place, Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. But we just need, I have the sign behind me here: heart, honor, and respect people into office. Are you one of these people?
Yeah, I hope so. I definitely hope so. I think it ultimately comes down to the kind of quintessential point is people being informed of who are actually funding these politicians, right? Because like you said, we could have politicians that are saying the good slogans and saying the good catchphrases that, will get them elected, whether it be a Democrat or a Republican, right? They know their talking points and they know kind of the things they need to say to get them elected in those positions. But we as voters have to say, okay, well, you just being a Democrat or just being a Republican, aren't good enough. We need someone that is actually going to call out the system and push for fundamental structural change. And I think one way, like you mentioned, to kind of test which candidates are more in line with that message and that ideology is looking at actually who's actually funding their campaigns, which is all public available information. So I'd highly encourage everyone listening to this, all voters, to review who's actually funding their candidates. It may take, 20, 15 minutes to actually look through, but it's well worth it to actually see who's funding these campaigns. Sorry, because like we keep saying,
a good resource. Sorry, Hunter. A good resource for that is called Open Secrets.
Yes,
the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, has a website too, but Open Secrets has a really good website for that. So I recommend our listeners check out that for their candidates.
Yes.
Sorry to cut you off.
Highly recommend. Yes. No, please. That was perfect. Yeah, exactly. So there's different resources like that, like Open Secrets, where you can actually see who's providing funds for the campaigns and then look into those different organizations as well. And you'll often see, exactly why. So for example, if your elected official is voting one way and you're like, weird, I wonder why they would vote this way. It seems strange. Go look at who's supporting their campaign. It'll be quickly, apparent why they voted that way. It's 9 times out of 10, it'll come down to who their donors are. So I highly encourage every voter to always look that through when you're making a choice for a candidate. And then in that same vein, make sure that people are paying attention to the primaries, because not every Democrat is the same. Not every Republican is the same. So actually calling that out and saying that we can choose different candidates in the primaries is super important. People that aren't beholden to the big money interests that we keep talking about. So for example, our campaign, we don't take PAC money, corporate PAC money. We don't take special interest money. We're all just grassroots funded. So I'd highly encourage everyone to really look at candidates that are doing that same thing and seeing where their loyalties actually lie. Because our sole loyalty is to the people of our country and the people of our district, rather than the big money that's funding our funding other campaigns. So that I would say is one of the most important things, that we as voters make informed decisions in the primaries and then obviously in the general elections as well. But making sure that we're informed of who's funding these campaigns is so important.
That's a great little segue for me here, because we've been working on something and we're hopefully soon to have it released, which I'm calling the pathway to the amendment, because the goal is to get that constitutional amendment for us. But it's everybody that's running across America in all the congressional races. There's 435 for the House. One of which is a special election coming up in December. And so those candidates are out there now. That's Matt Van Epps, Afton Bain, and John Thorpe, who I just mentioned just before. But we've researched their campaign websites, and don't you know that 57% of congressional races, which is good, right? 57% have somebody running in that race that's definitely supportive or probably supportive of the constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United or something along those lines, of campaign finance reform. Yeah. And in the Senate, there's 35 Senate races. 71% of those races have somebody that's supportive or probably supportive of campaign finance reform. I was really pleasantly surprised by those numbers. Now it's like you said, getting through the primary, getting those candidates through the primary of their race. One thing I also will say that it was telling, we need more Republicans to stand up and be leaders on this issue. It is a desperate need for Republican citizens of this country that view money in politics as a problem to stand up and to speak up against it. If you believe in capitalism, it's a necessity, because right now we have a system that is broken capitalism, so to say. It's crony capitalism. So I'm looking forward to hearing more Republican voices in leadership on this. And once that happens, guys, we are not that far away from a constitutional amendment, because we're built for it. We are absolutely built to amend this Constitution, and it's something like this where so many people agree, it's a no-brainer. It's doesn't need to be viewed as overly complex. It is basic representation, basic representative democracy when you have this many people that support an issue. You just need to get the leaders to do it. So, Hunter, thank you for being one of these people. And
Yeah, like you
be
said,
critical. You're in a great opportunity right now.
Yeah. And like you said, there's so much support. It's just a matter of actually reflecting that in our leaders and not allowing us to be distracted by these other issues that they love to throw at us, where, people will tend to give up that type of support and say, well, okay, maybe right now we don't have to focus on this because there's this other new issue that just came up type of thing. So I hope voters will stay steadfast in that idea that we have to address this, and this has to be at the top of the list of things that have to change. And across party lines, like you said, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. The idea that we have free elections and actually have people or voters that are actually represented in our democracy is a concept that every American should be behind. So I agree with it. It should be at the top of every politician's list, and we just have to constantly be calling that out and making that a priority.
Do you think in today's world with social media and kind of the availability of discussion over social media channels that there couldn't be a system that you can get your message out without having vast troves of financial resources?
That's
kind of
such a great
reimagining the
question.
system?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's definitely something I've seen, is that we've seen kind of this shift in politics. It's a very slow shift, unfortunately, but it is a shift I've been seeing personally, is away from the necessity of you have to have X amount of dollars, whether it be $1 million or 500,000 or whatever, to run these campaigns. And then on the flip side, so someone like me, for example, I would have probably have had zero chance to run against an incumbent if say this was 20 years ago with the old system, where nowadays I can get on social media, or any candidate or anyone across the country can get on, whether it be social media or, some news organizations are trying to pick up smaller pieces and things like that. But specifically, social media is such a great avenue to cut out that barrier of how to actually reach people directly and reach voters directly. So, for example, we've had a huge push on TikTok, for example, as one of the social media platforms that have really been big for us, and just ways to actually reach voters directly, rather than, say, spending $1 million on a TV ad that'll have, the politician shaking hands with people and then smiling and saying something about being anti-Trump. That's the playbook that every Democrat has been running on. And luckily the current system, or this new wave of specifically social media, has really leveled that playing field. But with that being said, there's still so many institutional barriers that are put in place. So, for example, as a candidate, one of the first things that people experience is that they'll be reached out to by a lot of organizations in the political arena that work on campaigns directly. They're usually partisan. So if you're a Democrat, you'll be reached out to by the Democratic organizations, or Republican or independent, whether, depending on what it might be. But their main focus, and not literally 100% of the people I talked with, are singly focused on how much money you can raise as a candidate. They don't care about policy. They don't care about what things you're going to be pushing for or what you're going to be doing to actually help people. The sole focus comes down to the money. And that's an unfortunate reality. That exactly. And like I said, there's no mention of policy. There's no mention of, these are the things that I want to actually do to help people. Its sole focus is on money. And with that being said, and to the point of your question, is that I've personally seen that barrier kind of breaking down. So, for example, we've raised a fraction of what my opponent is currently raising, where he's raised almost $1.5 million, right? So we have nowhere near access to that amount of capital. But on that same
It's a lot of money.
Exactly. In that same vein, our whole focus, and the single focus of our campaign, is to address voters directly and actually engage with voters. One, hear their concerns, and then actually communicate the policies that we're actually going to be pushing for to actually create change to address those concerns, is kind of the main focus of our campaign. So you don't need $1 million to get, volunteers out to go knock doors, right? So we've already been canvassing because had such a groundswell of people wanting to get involved and really believe in the message and the idea that we as a campaign are pushing for. And not just our campaign, this is a movement across the country that we've been seeing, and we're just lucky enough to be a part of that wave of people wanting to see that change. So, for example, we've already had volunteers out canvassing, knocking doors, talking to voters, sharing information about the campaign. And one way we were able to reach those volunteers and reach other voters was through social media. So that has been a huge, tool for us to utilize to break down those barriers. And I do see that continuing into the future and making it more easy for candidates to run against the big money that we currently see. But with that being said, that can only get you so far, and there's so many other factors that play into that. So, for example, if anyone had seen, for example, Deja Fox's campaign in Arizona, she was a candidate running that had a lot of social media support, although that necessarily didn't translate to a big share of the vote come the election, although that was a special election in a very short time frame. But in that same vein too, it can show the power of social media. So she was able to raise over $1 million just by small dollar donations through social media. And this was the
And
special
how did she
elections.
fare in the election?
I think she came out with about 20% of the primary vote, which was a decent chunk considering the fact that literally, I think she had 4 months to run. So it was a very short time frame, but that's just one example of the power that social media can come to actually raising money specifically. But then on the flip side, making sure you translate that to actual votes, which require actually getting out there, talking with voters, engaging directly with voters. And that is a very big uphill battle to overcome. But like I was saying, a lot of the times these big campaigns will be shelling out tens of thousands of dollars every month for staff, and then also to pay volunteers to do those things. But when you're running on a message that people actually believe in and want to be a part of, you can get that buy-in without actually paying, having to spend tens of thousands of dollars on these things. In my opinion, a lot of the times the politicians that are currently running in the system are very, I don't know the nice way to say it, not as don't get as people fired up as they should be. So they're reliant on a lot of money to help fire up their campaigns and run those things, as opposed to a campaign where we've been super fortunate to have this momentum of people wanting to get involved. So we have staff that are all volunteer. We don't have the funds to be paying people at the moment. So we've been very fortunate to get, a huge variety of people wanting to help out completely free, which has been amazing because they believe in that message and that idea. So I think tapping into that and really getting people fired up about these campaigns is super important to overcome that huge discrepancy that comes with the influence of money when you're dealing with the current system.
Yeah, I think that, that's at the heart of this theory, and that's what we're doing right here today, right? So this is, I want to say, basically zero cost, zero fee.
Exactly.
We're getting message out. You're running for office. We can do more of this with other, not saying just us, but other people, other channels, and people could get more communication out, long form interviews. So the individual that you mentioned, I'm not familiar with her, I apologize, from Arizona, secures 20% of the vote, but 20 years ago probably doesn't get like 1 or 2% because social media is not as impactful there. So it's like turning over what you are going against. One of those main obstacles still there is just the legacy media, the legacy print, everybody that views them as the benchmarks for what matter, for what opinions matter. If it's written in there, then they must be right. They're not biased at all,
Right.
And I agree that the people writing them probably don't, but overall as the system, somehow, some way, the voices that want to see money out of politics, or the voices that want to see reform in this area, they don't get put on the stage. They're not viewed as what's the realistic candidate. Because why? They don't have the big money fundraising. So you're only a realistic candidate if you've got $1 million plus raised. So you
Exactly.
see that trick that they do there?
Yes,
And I'm sure
exactly.
you're gonna, if you haven't yet, you're gonna be coming into it, unfortunately. Um, and another thing that I saw, which is really alarming, saying saw is the wrong word, but heard, was from Donna Charles. She was our second interview that we did in the candidate coalition.
Mm,
She said, and she filed a police report on this, that her ballot signatures from Roanoke, Virginia disappeared. And
I
she
heard of
felt that there
this.
was foul
Yes.
play involved in that, meaning that, I guess as you're running for governor, you have to, get support to help get ballots. And the company that she used to help do that, whether they were infiltrated or what, I don't know, but Roanoke disappeared. That
Hmm.
off it, the ballots. So, or the signatures disappeared and it kept her off the ballot. Um, so,
Yeah,
it
that's like
just,
a perfect example of two. I think one thing that people need to realize is that and I obviously don't know what happened in that specific circumstance, so I don't want to make any, um, assumptions, but
yeah.
with that, the level that the local parties have and the state parties have is something that people really need to think about. Specifically, so for example, with the Democratic Party, we have, party clubs in individual cities, but then also a state party and then also county parties. And those parties inherently are very much aligned with supporting the incumbent and making it seem like the party has everything in line. And, that we don't want to be calling ourselves out. We want to just be focused on being anti-Republican. And that mindset in the party is something that unfortunately has been very dominant. And I think something as challengers to the current system that we have to be calling out is saying that, the Democratic Party has to be more open to alternative ideas and people wanting to call out the current Democrats and push for change within our party rather than just saying, we everything's fine here. Let's just focus on being anti-Trump and not change anything about our party is a silly mindset to have, in my opinion. And unfortunately, I think something that the different parties across the country tend to fall into. And then ultimately with the National Democratic Party and the leadership that we're seeing there, that has to have a complete overhaul, right? We have such a lack of leadership in one regard, and then also a lack of a unified message on what we as a party actually stand for. We become such a, in my opinion, disillusioned, jaded party that is just focused on being anti-MAGA rather than proposing an alternative to people. So that goes whether it be local party, state party, federal party, us actually wanting to call that out and saying, hey, we as a party have to be doing something very, very differently to then go and win these elections. But all to say, there's a lot of party actors in the party that are resistant to outside influence in the
Mhm.
party. So that's inherently a barrier that challengers have to overcome in and of itself. So yeah, it's definitely a massive uphill battle, but I definitely think it's doable. But yeah, like you said, with regards to the ballots, that's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah. So be on the lookout, just
yeah,
make sure, not, be aware, I
hmm
guess, as you go. And then anybody else that's running, be aware of these additional obstacles,
yeah, exactly,
if there aren't
exactly,
enough already.
right.
Let me ask you this. So I think you could be a help to people that want to get involved, that want to consider running for office, right? That they're thinking that maybe this is something that they need to do as well. Because I mentioned 57% running in congressional races that support or probably support. And that means there's 43% of races without somebody running in them, right? And that's part
hmm
of this
hmm
pathway to the amendment, is knowing where the races that we don't have somebody running in them. Ideally, we get a Republican, Democrat, Independent all running to get big money out
Yeah,
of politics, right?
exactly.
And then you're for sure going to get somebody through that wins. Um, what, I don't know, advice to getting started? What do you need to do to get started? So this isn't really taught to us. Maybe if you went to
hmm
political science major, you would learn how to get started with a political campaign. But if you're just somebody and you're like, I want to get started, and you're like, I'm going to call up my local Democrat or Republican, committee, I want to get started. their first question to you is, how much money do you have? It seems like,
Right.
basically. But so you
Yep.
can't go that route. How do you get started? What is, what's
Yeah.
one piece
No,
or
that's
two
an
pieces of
amazing
advice you
question.
can give to somebody?
It's such a great question because there is no playbook. There's no one to call to ask, hey, what should I do? It's very much, especially like someone like me who's running a grassroots campaign and doesn't have the party backing. It's so much just kind of figuring out as you go. One thing I've been very fortunate to be a part of is that, like I mentioned earlier, there's such a national groundswell of people wanting to step up. So for example, I've been part of a bunch of different group chats across the country of different candidates that are also running as well. So we've just been sharing tips and tricks in that, and getting a lot of good feedback from people in that regard. So just making sure that you have a foundation of people to turn to, whether it be someone else, across the country running, or, something as simple as, your neighbors, or just someone to just talk to and have an outlet to discuss the issues is super important. And then the initial steps of actually getting started, it's essentially a simple filing process. You can go to the FEC website, go through their processes to file. That process is pretty simple in and of itself. The key comes down to building the support that you need to actually get elected. And that boils down to, for example, like you said, whether it be going down the party route, one thing specifically, if it's an open seat and there's no incumbent to the seat, then the party will be very helpful in trying to get you engaged and involved. If you are running as a challenger, it can be inherently a little bit more of a sticky situation because the party will 9 times out of 10 back the incumbent because that's their person and that's the
Mhm.
system that it is. So in our case, we have relatively limited contact with the party. We're kind of just doing things on our own. But one of the biggest things I hope people take away from this is realizing that it's doable. Like anyone can do it. It's just a matter of putting in the effort and wanting to do it through the long haul, especially with grassroots campaigns. Time is such a valuable aspect of making sure that you have a viable campaign. So we started a year in advance before the primary to make sure that we could build up the foundation to actually make that a reality. One thing I would highly discourage people to do is to go out and get a campaign manager right away that you're spending thousands of dollars a month on. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll be reached out to by a lot of organizations and some campaign managers, for example, that'll want to work with you, but they do require fees that, whether it be $2,500 a month, I've seen $5,000 a month, I've seen sometimes $10,000 a month. And that's just a single position on some campaigns. So like when you talk about campaigns, for example, like my opponent who's raised $1.5 million, he's shelling out tens of thousands potentially a month just to have this staff that's running their campaigns, as opposed to a grassroots campaign like ours where you can get that work through volunteer means or just doing it yourself. Like I've done so much of that work just literally by myself, figuring it out as you go. So I'd highly discourage people to think that they have to hire people on immediately or even in the long term at all, really, if it comes down to it, because your single focus is to engage with voters and get your name in front of voters. You can do that in a lot of different ways that don't require you to be shelling out all this money every single month. And then another, in that same vein, talking with people that are doing these things already. There's so many people, so many organizations across the country that are doing such important work and that want to be involved with campaigns like yours and get super excited when they hear about challengers. One of the biggest things that I've come to realize is that there's so many groups and organizations that are pushing for really important things. And then when they go to, say, their congressperson or their city council member, they're reached with a stone wall because, like we talked about earlier, our politicians tend to be beholden on big money interests and not actually, and fail to actually address the root causes of a lot of these issues that we're dealing with. So one thing is super important is to tap into those organizations that are calling those things out, that are already in your area. So we've been very fortunate enough to partner with a lot of these organizations that are already doing a lot of this work in the area that want to see that real structural change. So then those are vital assets to have. And they're also voters themselves and want to volunteer for the campaigns as well. So that's been a huge resource for us to get volunteers as well. So I'd highly encourage people to reach out to local organizations. Doesn't have to be a political organization at all. It could be, an ethnic group, a religious group even, or, any type of interest group that there is out there. There's so many organizations of people on the ground doing that work already, so making sure that you're tapping into that as well. And then one of the biggest things, kind of going back to social media, is just posting as much and frequently as you can to build that following. Literally just a video a day, something as simple as that. It can add up over time, having to do that every single day. But just having a constant flow of information so you can really utilize the social media stream is super important. There's tons of other things too.
Listen,
that I'd
that's
love
great. No, that is a great answer. And so what I heard, one thing is, get started soon if you're interested in it. It's right now you're just about a year from the general election. So, and you're probably 7 months to the primary or so. You have time, but it's time to get going. If you want to know if you're in a location that doesn't have anybody running, get money out of politics type campaign focused on that as a central issue, go to Ballotpedia, right, for one, or go to the FEC website and you can see who's running, or go to their campaign websites, and see if they list getting money out of politics or overturning Citizens United as one of their key priorities, or if they're talking about government corruption. And if they're not, well, that's a vacancy that we as a country or as a people are desperate to get filled. I think
exactly
that connects with across the political spectrum. So you want to be a winner, you want to be victorious in your election, you got to get voters from both sides as well to come and support you. That's how you get that overwhelming support. And
exactly.
And if you do want to run and and you hear this, look up the 75, contact us as well, because we love to put you on the air and use your story as getting started. I think it's inspirational. I think it's empowering. And that's what we need a lot more of in this country on this issue. More discussion, more inspiration, and more empowerment for people to talk about it and feel hopeful about.
Exactly. Yeah, like you said, empowering people to engage in those conversations and then actually push for the changes that we want to see. And that too, people can if people listening to this can contact us directly on our website as well. It's huntermiranda2026.com. You can reach out to us and we'd love to help you through the process of getting started or, anything like that. So always wanting to help and engage in that is so important, of building a network of people wanting to push through for these changes. So.
Absolutely. Hunter Miranda 2026.com is the campaign website. And then from there, if you're not familiar with his social media accounts, there's going to be links to your social media, all of your different accounts on there. So I'm sure they'll be able to find one that they use, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, right? Depending on your generation.
Yeah, exactly. So we're on all the social medias and love to stay involved and love to hear from people specifically. One thing that we're super passionate about is our policy platform and actually wanting to be talking specific policies and pushing specific policies. So with that, we love engaging with people directly to hear their take on different policies, or, if they have an opinion or, a new policy position that we haven't discussed. We always want to talk and hear about it. So any and all feedback and discussions are super appreciated.
Yeah, I'm looking at your policies on the side over here, and it's robust. There's a number of policies that are there. It's a good campaign website. Honestly, I looked at a lot of them. I can tell you that. In doing the research, I've looked at a lot, and so you've done a good job with yours. And I encourage everybody to get out and look at your website, huntermiranda2026.com. Hunter, we've been talking now for over an hour. Time has gone fast.
Wow.
Yeah. How about words of encouragement or, kind of closing remarks for voters in your area or voters across the country? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I hope people understand and realize is that we can do this. We can make these changes that we keep talking about and fighting for. It is possible. It's just a matter of putting our head down, being dedicated and committed to really pushing for these structural changes. So that's like, I think one of the biggest takeaways I want people to realize is that it is doable. There is hope. We can make these changes happen. It's just a matter of us really willing to call out the system and push for these structural changes that have to happen to unrig our economy and to unrig our government to allow it to actually benefit the people, right? We're the United States of America, one of the wealthiest, most powerful nation in the history of the world. And the reason that we're the strongest nation is because we, the people of the United States, are the most powerful people in the history of the world, because we have that idea and that belief that all people are created equal, and that that's something that we is an inherent, binding of what makes us Americans. And that idea that we all have a say in our democracy and a say in our future is something that is so important to that belief. And we as voters have a massive responsibility and a duty to make that a reality, not just in our country, but across the globe. The things that we vote for, they don't just impact us here in the United States, but they have global impacts, and something that we as voters need to realize that there's no more important job than being an American voter, because of the consequences that our decisions have, and that we actually do have that power to make those changes through our vote. A lot of the times we'll hear that, one vote doesn't matter, your vote doesn't matter, you individually can't be doing this, when that's lies that are pushed on us to keep the current system in place, where we need to realize as voters that we can make that difference and we can make that change. So just keep that focus, keep that determination, is so important, especially when times gets tough and scary. I know a lot of people are dealing with tough and scary times. So push through. There is a light at the tunnel, and is hope. So, yeah.
Hunter, I tell you, man, you get the 75 coalition vote of approval.
Love it.
Fantastic. Thank you for, spending this time with us and recording, and I wish you, the absolute best in the primary and the campaign leading up to it. And we're here for you. If you want to come back on, we'd love to have you back on the show. Let us know how it's going, or we'll give some updates to our viewers as we keep this thing rolling. And we're looking forward to doing more interviews with more people, supportive debates from the other side as well. So fantastic. Thank you for helping us, because this is how we grow as well. It's about recognizing, discussing, and solving, right? And one of the things that I've been saying is, if you believe you can't do something and you don't try to do it, it's not going to get done. I like to say the example, like tying your shoes. If you don't think you can tie your shoes and you don't try to tie your shoes aren't going to get tied, right? Unless somebody else does it for you.
Right.
So that's the way I kind of feel about this money in politics topic, right? We got to believe that it is possible, and we got to try to do something. So, I encourage everybody to share this podcast around. Like, let's make it go viral. Share it as much as possible. Kind of that pay it forward approach, right? Share with 3 people. Like, let's get this out there and get people talking about this. Hunter Garcia Miranda, California's 47th Congressional District, HunterMiranda2026.com. Guys, thank you everybody for being part of this. Thank you, Hunter, for coming on. And please
thank you so much.
Share the podcast. Wishing you the best, and let's absolutely stay in touch as we build this coalition out. And like I said, you got the stamp of approval. If I was in California's 47th, I'm pretty darn sure I'd be voting for you based on this conversation, because you touched on so many key central issues here that cross the political spectrum, right? These are issues that really are at the heart of problems in this country. So thank you for coming on and discussing them. Now we got to
thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's a really great conversation.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining, and please like and share and comment on the podcast. We love to see your comments. So thank you, and until next time, recognize, discuss, and solve. Let's go.
Bye-bye.